If you're listening to this before sleep, close your eyes. Let the world slow down. Tonight, I'll tell you a story about a small tree. A tree that learned how to wait. Because sometimes growing slow is its own kind of strength. In a quiet valley, hidden between rolling green hills, where the sunlight seemed to pause before spilling over the earth, there stood a tiny tree. It was smaller than the rest, a sapling no taller than the morning grass that shimmered with dew. Yet there was something different about it, something quiet and hopeful that lingered in the way its leaves trembled with every touch of the wind. Around the little tree stretched a great forest. Hundreds of tall, ancient trees towered above, their trunks thick with wisdom, their roots winding deep into the heart of the soil. They reached so high that their branches brushed the drifting clouds, painting the air with whispers of age and grace. When the dawn broke each morning, the tall trees caught the first golden rays, their leaves turning to fire beneath the sun's warm hand. Birds sang in their arms, nesting in safety high above the ground, and the forest came alive with the music of wings and rustling leaves. But down below, in the dappled shade of giants, the little tree waited. It stretched its tender branches toward the sky each day, reaching a little farther, hoping a little more. It watched the sunlight dance far above, just out of reach, and whispered softly, almost too softly for even the wind to hear, "When will it be my turn to touch the sky?" The days passed gently, as they always did in the valley. The sun rose and fell like a slow breath, and the seasons turned with unhurried grace. In spring, the tall trees dressed themselves in new leaves, bright and full of life, their branches filled with blossoms that smelled like rain and honey. In summer, they stood proud and strong, their canopies so thick they turned the ground below into a cool green twilight. In autumn, their leaves burned in hues of copper and crimson, falling like whispers to the earth. And in winter, they stood bare but beautiful, their silhouettes painted against a pale sky of snow and silence. Through it all, the little tree watched and waited. Its roots dug deeper into the earth, feeling the heartbeat of the valley below. Its trunk grew a little stronger with each sunrise, though it still remained hidden beneath the shadows of its towering neighbors. Sometimes, when the forest was quiet and the world felt still, the wind would wander through the valley, a soft traveler carrying the scent of faraway places. It would brush past the tall trees with a sigh, and then circle gently around the tiny sapling. The little tree would feel its cool touch on its leaves and whisper once more, "When will it be my turn, dear wind? When will I be tall enough to reach the clouds?" And the wind, with a voice that sounded like 1,000 memories, would answer, "Patience, little one. The sky never forgets anyone. Every tree grows in its own time." The little tree would tremble softly at those words, not with fear, but with understanding. So it smiled, as much as a tree can smile, and continued to grow, quietly, faithfully, without envy or hurry. Days turned to months, and months to years. Rain fell and fed its roots, sun warmed its bark, and even the coldest winters could not freeze the hope that lived within it. the forest around it continued to thrive. Birds building new nests, animals finding shelter, and the tall trees creaking proudly in the wind. There were moments when the little tree felt small, moments when it watched the others sway gracefully in the high winds, their crowns brushing the clouds, while it could only feel the echoes of that movement far below. But then, a beam of sunlight would find its way through the thick canopy and rest upon its tender leaves, as if the sky itself had leaned down to say, "I see you." And that was enough. The little tree began to notice things the taller ones could not. It saw the smallest of creatures that lived close to the soil, the beetles that carried dew on their backs, the soft worms that whispered secrets through the roots, the shy flowers that bloomed in places no sunlight had ever touched before. It became a quiet guardian of the forest floor, a friend to the overlooked and the unseen. Seasons continued to weave their endless pattern, and though its growth was slow, it never stopped. Each ring within its trunk carried stories of patience and endurance, stories of rainstorms survived, of winters endured, of the simple joy of existing in the valley's gentle rhythm. One day, after many seasons had passed, the wind returned stronger than ever. It rushed through the valley, roaring like the sea, bending even the tallest trees until their branches groaned and leaves scattered like birds. The little tree held firm, its roots deep and steady, and when the storm finally quieted, it looked up and realized that the tallest trees had lost many of their highest branches. The canopy above was no longer as thick as before. For the first time, the sunlight poured down without obstruction, bathing the little tree in gold. Every leaf shimmered, every branch glowed. It felt the warmth seep into its very heart, the warmth it had waited for all its life. It did not yet touch the sky, not quite. But now it could see it, vast and blue and full of promise. And the little tree understood something the others had perhaps forgotten, that growing tall was not the only way to reach the sky. Sometimes it was enough to keep growing, steadily, faithfully, without losing hope. That evening, as the valley sank into a soft hush, and the stars began to bloom in the darkening sky, the wind passed by again. It brushed gently against the little tree's leaves and whispered, "Do you see now, little one?" The tiny tree swayed, its branches glistening in the starlight, and whispered back, "Yes, I see. The sky never forgets anyone." And in that quiet valley, beneath the wide heavens and among the tall, proud trees, the little one continued to grow, not in haste, not in envy, but in quiet joy. Because at last it knew its turn would come, and when it did, it would be ready. Seasons came and went, and still the little tree waited. Spring arrived first, painting the valley in colors that shimmered like laughter. Morning after morning, the air filled with songs of awakening, tiny wings fluttering through golden light, bees humming over blossoms that trembled with dew. The earth smelled of promise, of beginnings, of things too small to see, but too beautiful to forget. All around, the tall trees stretched their arms wide, bursting with new leaves and fragrant flowers. Birds built their nests high among those strong branches, weaving them with care and singing as they worked. The forest floor glowed with sunlight that slipped through the canopy like liquid gold. The little tree watched in wonder, its small green shoots unfurled carefully, reaching toward the warmth it could barely touch. It waited, patiently, quietly, hoping maybe a bird might land on one of its tender branches, just for a moment. But none came. The birds flew above, chasing one another through the air, never seeing the little one below. Still it smiled, shaking its few tiny leaves in the wind and whispering softly, "Maybe next spring." The wind brushed past, gentle and kind, and carried that whisper away. Then came summer, fierce, bright and bold. The sun rose earlier each day, and by noon its heat poured down like fire upon the valley. The ground hardened and cracked beneath the weight of its light, and the river that once sang so joyfully shrank into a narrow silver ribbon between the stones. The tall trees with their deep roots drank deeply from the cool layers of earth below. Their thick leaves shaded them from the sun's burning gaze. But the little tree, too young, too small, stood beneath the wide sky, with no shade to hide beneath. Its tiny leaves curled inward to protect themselves, and the ground around it grew dry and dusty. The wind was hot now, carrying not the scent of flowers but the dry whisper of faraway places, deserts perhaps, or mountains where no rain ever fell. It passed over the little tree, weary and restless. Still, the little tree did not complain. It stood as tall as it could, though its roots ached and its bark felt tight. It watched the clouds drift by, high and slow, and whispered softly, "I can wait." I was made to grow, and though the days were long and the nights offered little rest, it endured. Then came autumn, with its soft winds and golden sighs. The valley transformed again, painted now in shades of copper and honey. Every leaf seemed to glow as though the sun had kissed it goodbye. The tall trees swayed proudly, shedding their leaves in a final dance, each one drifting down like a memory, spinning and glimmering before coming to rest on the forest floor. The little tree watched the others let go so gracefully, and it too felt the pull of change. It had only a handful of leaves, yet each one was precious, a piece of the sunlight it had gathered through the long, hard summer. So it held them close, cradling them gently as the wind passed by. The valley was quieter now. Birds had flown south. The days grew shorter, the light softer, and the nights filled with the scent of cool earth and distant rain. Sometimes the wind would murmur, "Let go, little one." Even the leaves must fall to rise again, and though the little tree did not yet fully understand, it listened. It watched the world turn, and trusted that everything happened in its time. Then came winter, silent, cold, endless. The first snow fell like feathers, soft and slow, blanketing the valley in white. The river disappeared beneath a sheet of ice, and the air grew so still that even sound seemed to hide. The tall trees stood bare and stoic, their branches black against the pale sky. They creaked in the wind like old ships on a frozen sea. The little tree, now wrapped in frost, bowed beneath the weight of snow. Its delicate branches trembled under the cold, bending almost to the ground. Nights were long, the kind of long that makes you forget what warmth feels like. But deep within its trunk, beneath the frozen bark, a faint pulse of life still stirred. Slow, steady, waiting. Even in the coldest hour, when moonlight turned the world to silver and all seemed asleep, the little tree remembered. It remembered the wind's voice, the one that had comforted it since the beginning. Patience, little one. The sky never forgets anyone. So it stood through the storms, through the biting winds and quiet snowfalls. And though it could not see it, beneath the frozen ground, its roots continued to grow, reaching deeper, stronger, preparing for the day the thaw would come. When dawn finally broke on the first morning of spring, the frost began to melt. The sunlight, soft and golden, returned to the valley once more. And there, standing small but unbroken, was the little tree. Its branches bare, its spirit unbowed, waiting to begin again. One quiet afternoon, when the sky looked like brushed silk, and the valley lay wrapped in a hush of sunlight, a wanderer appeared on the path. He moved slowly, as if each step carried the memory of long miles behind it. His clothes were worn from travel, the hems dusted with earth, and his boots told stories of deserts crossed and mountain passes endured. His eyes, those gentle, searching eyes, had the kind of light that only comes from having seen both joy and sorrow, and learning to hold them both with grace. He walked as though he had no destination, only a desire to keep going until something, or someone, told him to stop. The valley welcomed him the way it welcomed the dawn, softly, without question. The air was warm and smelled faintly of pine and wildflowers. The wind, playful and curious, brushed against him as if recognizing an old friend. As he wandered deeper, his gaze fell upon the little tree, standing quietly among the tall ones. It was not impressive at first glance. Small, slender, easy to overlook. But something about it drew him closer. Perhaps it was the way its leaves shimmered in the light, or the quiet steadiness of its trunk, or simply that it was there, still standing, still waiting. The man smiled faintly and approached. He lowered himself to the ground beside the little tree, letting out a long breath, the kind that carried both weariness and peace. He rested his back against its slender trunk, which bent slightly but did not break. For a while, neither spoke. There was no need for words. The only sound was the wind drifting through the leaves, a soft rustle like whispers between old friends. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, and the faraway river murmured beneath the hills. Time seemed to slow in that moment. The wanderer closed his eyes, feeling the rough bark against his palms. There was life there, quiet, patient life, the same kind that had carried him through his own lonely roads. Finally, he opened his eyes and spoke, not loudly, but in a tone that felt like a secret shared between souls. "You're still here," he said softly, his voice tender, almost awed. You must have been waiting a long time." The little tree swayed gently at his words. Its small leaves fluttered in the afternoon breeze, not because of the wind alone, but as if it was nodding, saying, "Yes, I've been waiting, but I'm still here." The wanderer smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that belonged to someone who understood what waiting meant. He brushed his hand over the bark, tracing its tiny cracks, feeling its strength beneath the fragile surface. "Don't rush, little one," he murmured. "Some of us bloom late, but our shade feels the warmest." The words lingered in the air long after he spoke them. It was not advice, not even comfort. It was truth, spoken from one soul to another who shared the same rhythm of endurance. The little tree seemed to listen deeply. Something in those words settled inside it, like sunlight seeping into roots. It didn't fully understand yet, but it felt the meaning, that there was no shame in growing slowly, no weakness in waiting for the right season to bloom. For a long time, they simply stayed together, man and tree, sharing the quiet. The wanderer leaned against its trunk and closed his eyes once more. The little tree stood steady, as if guarding him, and the valley around them seemed to hold its breath. Eventually, as the sun began to sink and the first colors of twilight spread across the sky, the man rose to his feet. He looked down at the little tree and smiled again. A soft, grateful smile, as if thanking it for the stillness it had offered him. Then, without another word, he turned and began to walk away. His figure grew smaller and smaller until he disappeared into the soft gold of the horizon. When he was gone, the valley felt different, not emptier, but deeper somehow, as though a secret had been whispered to the earth and carried off by the wind. The air shimmered with a quiet kind of magic, the kind that comes only from understanding something beautiful and true. From that day on, whenever the breeze passed through the little tree's branches, it carried a familiar sound. A voice, faint, gentle, almost hidden within the music of the wind, would seem to whisper, "Don't rush, your time will come." And the little tree, feeling the warmth of those words deep within its bark, would lift its leaves toward the sky. It did not know when that time would come, only that it would. And until then, it would keep growing, patient, steady, and full of quiet hope. One night, the valley fell silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence that comes with sleep, but a heavy, waiting silence, the kind that makes even the stars pause their shimmering. The air itself seemed to tighten, as though the sky were holding its breath. The animals hid in their burrows, the river slowed its song, and even the wind forgot how to move. The little tree felt it first, that stillness before chaos. Its leaves hung motionless, its roots tense beneath the soil. There was a strange energy in the air, humming low and deep, like the earth itself was whispering a warning. Then, a single drop of rain. It fell softly, striking the soil beside the little tree. A sound so small, so fragile. And yet it carried the weight of something about to begin. Another drop followed, then another. And then, suddenly, the sky broke open. The storm began. The rain poured down in torrents, fierce and wild. The wind roared through the valley, tearing at everything in its path. It wasn't just a storm. It was a test, a reckoning. The tall trees, the mighty ones that had laughed in the sunlight and stretched proudly toward the clouds, now shuddered beneath the storm's fury. Their long branches whipped and cracked in the wind. Leaves tore away like frightened birds, swirling into the darkness. Lightning tore across the sky, bright enough to turn night into momentary day. It split the heavens in blinding streaks of white fire. Thunder rolled after it, deep and angry, echoing off the mountains like the beating of a furious drum. The valley, once a cradle of calm and music, became a sea of chaos. The tall trees cried out as their trunks groaned under the weight of the wind. Some stood their ground, defiant and proud, but others, even the strongest, began to break. You could hear the sound of splintering wood, of roots tearing free from the soil, of centuries of growth brought down in a single night. And in the middle of it all, the little tree stood. It trembled, yes. Its branches whipped and its trunk bent low. But it did not break. It had no height to lose, no pride to shatter. It had learned how to bend, not resist. The wind pushed, and it leaned with it. The rain struck, and it drank what it could. Its small roots dug deeper, clutching the earth like hands in prayer. "Hold on," the little tree whispered to itself, though its voice was lost in the storm's roar. "Hold on. The sky never forgets anyone." And somehow those words gave it strength. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the valley for a heartbeat, and in that instant you could see it, the tall ones bowing, falling, breaking apart. But the little one, small, drenched, unseen, still standing, bending, breathing. Hours passed. The storm raged on, relentless, testing every branch, every root, every dream. And still, the little tree held on. Its trunk creaked with effort, its leaves were torn and battered. But inside, deep within the wood, something glowed. A quiet, unwavering pulse of life that refused to fade. At last, slowly, the storm began to tire. Its rage softened into sobs of rain. The thunder grew distant, rolling away into the mountains. The wind lost its sharp edge and became a sigh. And then only rain remained. Soft, forgiving, like tears after anger. It fell gently now, washing over the valley as if to say, "I'm sorry." The tall trees lay in ruin, proud giants humbled by the storm. Their branches tangled on the ground, their leaves scattered across the earth like fallen crowns. The air smelled of wet bark and fresh soil, the scent of endings and beginnings all at once. And there, in the quiet heart of the valley, the little tree stood. Its branches were bare, its bark scarred, but it was still upright, trembling, yes, but alive. Its tiny roots, deep and stubborn, had held on when all else had fallen. The dawn crept over the hills, pale and hesitant at first, as if afraid to disturb what the night had broken. Slowly, the light spread, golden, forgiving, tender. It touched the wreckage gently, kissed the broken trunks, and finally found the little tree. For the first time, sunlight fell upon it without shadows from the taller trees. It shone bright and warm on its damp leaves, and the little tree felt it, really felt it, deep in its heartwood. The sky was open now. There was space, light, freedom. The little tree lifted its branches, water dripping like jewels from its leaves. It looked up at the endless blue above and whispered softly, almost in disbelief, "I'm still here." And somewhere high above, carried on a faint breeze that smelled of rain and dawn, came a voice it remembered, a memory, a promise, a truth. The sky never forgets anyone. The little tree closed its eyes and let the sunlight bathe its face. For the first time, it no longer felt small. When the first light touched the valley, everything was still. The storm had gone, leaving only the scent of wet earth and the quiet ache of broken silence. Mist drifted above the ground like breath, and drops of rain clung to every blade of grass, catching the new sunlight like jewels. The world was soft again, fragile, calm, alive. The tall, mighty trees that had once ruled the valley lay scattered now. Their proud trunks were split, their roots torn from the soil and left bare to the morning. They had stood so high, reaching for the heavens. But even giants fall when the wind decides to test their strength. And in the center of it all stood the little tree. It was trembling, yes. Its bark scarred, its leaves few. But it was standing. It had bent with the wind instead of fighting it, and somehow that had saved it. Its roots clutched the softened ground like steady hands, and its branches, though thin, still reached upward with quiet defiance. The valley was silent for a long time. Then the wind returned, no longer wild, no longer full of thunder, but soft, gentle. It brushed past the little tree's leaves as if greeting an old friend. The air carried warmth again, and with it came a whisper. "You see, little one, the sky never forgets anyone." The little tree shivered, remembering. It had heard those words once, long ago, when it was smaller, when its hope was still a fragile thing. Now they meant something deeper. The wind wasn't just air moving through leaves. It was memory, it was promise, it was truth. The tree swayed quietly, feeling the world breathe again. The earth beneath it was rich and dark, soaked with the gift of rain. Its roots had grown deep through hardship, and now, for the first time, the little tree felt the strength that had been building within it all along. Days passed. Slowly life began to return to the valley. The fallen trees, though broken, gave back to the soil. Their trunks became shelter for small creatures. Their branches nourished the ground as they faded into it. New life sprouted everywhere, small green shoots pushing up through the softened earth. Birds returned too, carrying seeds from faraway places. They rested on the little tree's branches, something they had never done before, and dropped the seeds between its roots. Soon, tiny sprouts began to rise all around it. The valley bloomed again, but this time, everything grew around the little tree. It was no longer the smallest, nor the forgotten one hidden in shadow. It had become the heart of the valley, a quiet center where life began again. As the days grew warmer, sunlight poured freely through the open sky. There were no tall branches above to block it now. Every morning, Golden light touched the little tree first, warming its bark, drying the dew, filling it with quiet joy. And when the evening came, and the sun began to fall behind the hills, the little tree looked toward the sky, not with longing this time, but with peace. It remembered the days when it had whispered, "When will it be my turn to touch the sky?" It remembered waiting through seasons, through drought and frost, through wind and storm. It remembered the wanderer's voice, the wind's promise, and every whisper of patience it had ever held on to. Now it understood. It didn't need to reach the sky anymore, because somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, it had grown strong enough to hold the light within itself. The sun glowed through its leaves, turning them to gold. The wind hummed softly, weaving through its branches. Everything that had once seemed so far away, the light, the warmth, the sky, lived inside it now. And as twilight fell over the valley, the little tree stood tall, scarred but steadfast, small but unshakable. The world around it shimmered with renewal. The wind passed one last time, carrying a familiar voice through the still air. "You see, little one, the sky never forgets anyone." And beneath the vast, forgiving heavens, the little tree swayed gently, holding the light it had waited for all its life. It did not need to rise above the others to touch the sky. It had simply learned to grow, slow, quiet, and true, until the sky came down to meet it.